From soaring interest rates to a housing crisis affecting Canadians from coast to coast, people across the country are dealing with real problems heading into the new year. And they're looking to the federal government for real answers. So we went right to the source. Parliament Hill Bureau Chief for City News, Cormac McSweeney, and OMNI's Levine Gill sat down with the Prime Minister for a look back at the year and what the future holds.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining City News and OMNI News for this year-end interview.
It's a pleasure to be here with both of you.
All right, it's the holiday season, and unfortunately, a lot of Canadians are feeling the pinch. They're pulling back on spending during this affordability crisis. During the pandemic and afterwards, you said you would build back better for Canada. So why then are so many Canadians being forced to choose between paying the rent and buying their groceries?
It's a really tough time right now, and it's a really tough time because of global circumstances that are hitting really, really hard, whether it's global inflation and interest rates, whether it's disrupted supply chains from the pandemic, whether it's continued instability because of wars and geopolitics. It's having an impact everywhere. Now, here in Canada, we're focused on being there to support people with really tangible things. We've been able to cut childcare fees in half right across the country, just at a time where costs, as you say, of groceries and mortgages have gone up. We've been able to deliver dental care to families who haven't been able to send their kids to the dentist, and as of next year, seniors are going to have those options too. We're bringing in more competition for grocery stores to bring prices down. There's a lot of work to do, and people are struggling, but we're going to continue fighting for them every single day.
But you still have 2 million Canadians and counting this year using food banks, record numbers. Despite all those efforts, It's not making the difference that you would hope.
And that's why it's time to continue to double down on the things that are working on, being there to support people directly and indirectly with measures and investments that are going to create opportunities, support families, and grow a better future.
Now, on groceries, your actions amount to things that may eventually have an impact. Foreign chains are not going to pop up overnight. Loblaws and Walmart are pushing back against your suggested code of conduct. The price freezes we've seen were going to come into effect anyway. They do at this time of year. You have said that you want to potentially give consequences to grocery chains. So where are those consequences that you promised back in the fall, including tax measures?
Well, first of all, in terms of tangible benefits, we sent out a grocery rebate to 11 million Canadians that made a huge difference at a time where people were really feeling the pinch while inflation was much higher than it is right now. It's coming down, but it's still too much. On the grocery stores, I think it's actually a good sign that big grocery store owners are worried about the impact of our grocery code of conduct on them that is going to drive down some of their exorbitant profits and be there to support people. Yes, we are using a tough level of tools with the big grocery owners because they are making record profits at a time where Canadians are.
But any consequences?
We are continuing to push on them, yes.
All right, now on housing, throughout the fall we've seen a series of measures. However, this housing crisis has been brewing for many years. Experts, even the leader of the opposition, have been calling.
Sorry, you didn't just call the leader of the opposition an expert, did you? Because what we're seeing from him is nothing but
they've been
smoke
calling
and
for
mirrors.
more action for some time. Did you act too late to try and address this crisis and take a more concerted effort on this?
Well, actually, what's interesting is the leader of the opposition, the Conservatives, have voted against our housing measures. They voted against cutting the GST on rental construction. They voted against our rapid housing initiative. Just this week, I was here in Toronto with an announcement that covers in a building that is being constructed that we devoted $100 million in financing to. So that's concrete, but that started years ago, to make an announcement of $471 million more for Toronto to continue to accelerate densification, to build more housing faster, and to change the way we build housing here in Toronto and across the country. There is lots more to do, but we started this in 2017 with a national housing strategy that reversed all the inaction that happened when Pierre Poilievre was housing minister under the Conservatives, and they didn't get any housing built.
But the efforts as well, 3.5 million homes need to be built by 2030 according to the CMHC. This is kind of a drop in the bucket. But moving on, your own government is trying to boost immigration levels to even further record levels at a time where we are dealing with this housing crisis. Could this just compound the problem?
let's be very careful about how we talk about immigration, because there's a number of different pieces in that I think it's really important for people to understand. First of all, yes, we're increasing our immigration levels up to close to 500,000 people, because we need to be bringing people into this country to continue to create the incredible diversity and economic success that immigrants bring. There are three categories outside of that that have seen a massive spike over the past years. One is irregular asylum seekers, and on that we have to make sure we're working with international partners to make sure that the people who arrive here irregularly reduce in numbers. The second part is international students. Over the past 2 years, we've seen hundreds of thousands more international students than ever before, some of them showing up to places that aren't real schools of education and with terrible consequences for them, but also almost all of them showing up and having to find their own housing. And that puts pressure on communities around everywhere. So what we've actually done is demanded that if the federal government is going to approve international students coming in, the educational institutions need to make sure they're doing their job to make sure there's housing available for those international students. And the third area is temporary workers, that we need to grow the economy. But if a company needs to bring in a temporary worker to do a job that Canadians can't or won't do, they have to be more responsible for finding housing. So I don't like the fact that people are setting immigration against housing, because that's not the full story, but there are specific problems that have cropped up in the past couple of years that we are directly leaning in to address to keep Canadians' confidence strong in our world-class immigration system and in the incredible advantage it is to bring people into Canada from around the world.
On the subject of immigration, Prime Minister, last month, Omni News conducted a poll with Leger, which particularly surveyed immigrants. 2 in 5 say they're struggling to make ends meet, but 7 in 10 believe Canada doesn't have a proper settlement plan for these immigrants. How can we sustain record increase of immigration when we're hearing them say there isn't enough support?
Well, that's exactly something that we are very concerned about, because immigration to Canada has always gone hand in hand with integration. Canada is the country in which the largest proportion of people coming to this country as immigrants actually become full citizens, and that's been one of the successes of Canada. So again, we're increasing our immigration levels to 500,000 a year, which is responsible and fine. It's the temporary immigrants that have spiked massively over the past couple of years that is putting so much pressure on the whole system. And that's where, whether it's temporary foreign workers, international students, or asylum seekers, we're putting in place measures to both better support and to keep those numbers at manageable levels, so the people who come as immigrants or in family reunification can make sure they're getting the best success.
We at Omni, we have spoken to too many immigrants. They're saying they're working multiple jobs, sometimes 20 hours a day, just to be able to afford living here. Looking at our survey, quarters say this country has fallen short of their expectations. What's your message to them?
The message is, we understand being able to afford a home especially is the biggest challenge that so many people are facing. Rents are going way up, the cost of mortgages, being able to buy your own home, it seems out of reach, particularly for young people and new Canadians. That's why we have embarked upon one of the biggest home building projects in Canadian history. We've done this before. We've solved it before. At the end of World War II, we had to build record numbers of homes for all the soldiers coming home and their families. We're going to do it again, and that's why an announcement of $471 million for Toronto this week, a similar hundreds of millions of dollars announcement for Vancouver last week, more money that we're putting in to not just build more homes, but to change the way we build homes and where we build them so that we can actually solve this problem, because success and prosperity in Canada comes through having a safe place to call home. That's what our government is focused on.
Let's talk about international students. Just before you came here, your immigration minister said, and I quote, "We need to get the volumes coming in under control, particularly in areas where they're here on a fraudulent or abusive basis, and that we can expect further steps to curb that. What are those steps?
First of all, recognizing that when the province accredits those various institutions, it has to do the work to make sure that the young people who pay thousands of dollars to come to Canada for a good education actually get that good education. There's too many people being taken advantage of, and that means the province needs to be tougher on that accreditation. But more than that, if people come even to a great school and a real school, they cannot just be unleashed onto the community to try and find a rental home or a rental property. That's what's driving up the prices for them and for everyone. That's why one of the things we're going to look at before we authorize international students to come for next September is the institution needs to have a plan that is going to show that they can house, that there is affordable, supportive housing for those students. That's going to be a big change. We still want lots of international students to come, but we don't want that to be either driving people out of homes or driving rents up in a way that is unsustainable and, quite frankly, unfair both to those students and to the community that they're in.
And for those who aren't here on fraudulent basis, the financial requirement for them to study here is more than doubling. And yet the government is limiting the number of hours they can work just to get by. Where is the disconnect here?
Well, if someone's coming here to study for a great Canadian education, they shouldn't be expected to have to work a full-time job of 40 hours a week. That just doesn't make sense. You can't be a full-time student and have a full-time job. So by raising the financial requirements, we can know that including with the increase in cost of living that we've seen, we needed to make sure that was kept up with, because that number hadn't been raised in a long time.
But the focus on studies won't be there if they're stressed and they're worrying about how to...
But that's why we want to make sure that international students who come here do have the financial means to be able to study and not be stressed about money. So it was actually doing them a disservice to not require a high enough level of money in their bank accounts for them to be able to be successful. They need to be able to benefit fully from this education. And if they don't have the financial means to do that, that's not doing them a service, and it's not doing our community and country a service.
On the Israel-Hamas war, Prime Minister, Canada's now called for a sustained ceasefire with a vote at the UN, but it was after weeks and weeks of resistance. Why did it take the deaths of more than 18,000 civilians before you uttered the word ceasefire?
We were calling, one of the first countries calling for significant humanitarian pauses. It was really important to get aid into Gaza, into the civilians that were suffering, because the price of peace could not be the suffering of all Palestinians. We recognize and will always stand with Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law. But there is an ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza that requires the world to push towards a ceasefire. But that ceasefire can't be conditional. It can't be unconditional. It has to have Hamas lay down its arms. It has to have Hamas stop using humans as shields. It has to have Hamas release all hostages. And Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, cannot be involved in the future governance of Gaza as we move towards a two-state solution. That is Canada's position. We know we need to see peace in the Middle East, but that happens as we build with partners towards a two-state solution of a secure Palestine living alongside a secure Israel.
But how do you do that when both sides cannot come to an agreement, even on a recent pause? Just today, Hamas rejected an offer from Israel for a pause.
Well, that's where the international community, whether it's Canada working with its G7 partners, or Canada working with other friends around the world, or even Canada working directly with Arab and Gulf states to try and bring peace to this area. This is what we continue to do, because quite frankly, one of the things we're also seeing that is really concerning is the level of anger and frustration and even intolerance amongst Canadians. We're a country that does diversity better than just about any other place in the world. And the level of grief and anger and mistrust and even hate that we're seeing amongst Canadians is not helping in finding a resolution over there. Because if we can't figure out how to start talking together and working things out, then who else will around the world? And that's where we're continuing to step up.
Let's talk about the alleged murder plot linked to the Indian government. Nothing's been proven in court, but a U.S. indictment shows days before Hardeep Singh Nijjar's murder in BC, an undercover agent in the U.S. was told about a big target in Canada. Why couldn't we prevent Nijjar's death?
The responsibility of the Canadian government to protect all Canadians is exactly why we have been taking this so seriously from the very beginning. People come to this country from every corner of the world, and they need to know when they are here, they get to live freely as Canadians and hold the political views and the freedom of speech and freedom of conscience that we guarantee in Canada that other parts of the world aren't always there for. So making sure we're doing everything possible to protect Canadian citizens will always be our guide, whether it was leading up to this or whether it's now as we deal with this very difficult time. We're going to continue to stand for the rule of law, for our Canadian values, and for the protection of all of our citizens.
Why did you decide to go public in September with these allegations, and what might be the repercussions for India here?
Well, first of all, we approached India as soon as we started to know about these allegations and started to draw these conclusions through intelligence and our understanding of things. We let the Indian government know right away that they needed to take this seriously. Unfortunately, they didn't. They engaged in a level of attacks against Canada. They arbitrarily kicked out 41 of our diplomats, which is really hard for the Indo-Canadian community that has so many ties and so many connections. Not being able to deliver the services that connect our people, I think was a real mistake by India to violate the Vienna Convention and just choose to kick out 41 Canadian diplomats. But we want to be constructive. We want to be helpful in getting through this. So while we cannot turn our backs on such horrific potential violations of international law as the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil that a foreign government could have been involved in, we need to make sure that we're keeping Canadians safe, and that meant sharing with them what we knew, sharing with the world our concerns, and allowing the proper authorities and proper processes to go through the necessary steps as a country with a robust justice system and a system of the rule of law requires.
Prime Minister, last question for you, just about your leadership. It's not been the greatest year. You've suffered in the polls quite a bit. You have said that you're going to stay on as the party leader heading into the next election for the Liberals. But over the last 12 months, have you ever stopped and thought to yourself about potentially stepping down? And why did you decide to stay on if you did?
Well, I think this is the kind of job that you always have to ask, whether you've got the energy for it, whether you're still committed to it, whether you're the right person for the job. And there's no question in my mind that this is a time where everything's in the balance everywhere around the world, whether it's democracy, whether it's the environment and the fight against climate change and the desire to build a strong economy that works for everyone, the fight to be more inclusive, to stand up for everyone's rights. These are all the things that I ran on 8 years ago that we've made great strides on in Canada, but there is so much more at stake right now. I couldn't be the person I am and walk away from this fight right now, because what I owe Canadians, but mostly what I owe my kids in fighting every day for a better future, means that I am here to stand with Canadians and fight for them every day.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure, Cormac. It's a pleasure, Levine.